it is time for some fighting game history. Monster. Monster is a fighting game from 8105 Graphics. Now, this is a team that you probably haven't heard of. As far as I'm aware, the only things that 8105 Graphics have worked on is the Monster series, of which the original game was released as a PC title that you could purchase, and the sequel ended up in some kind of development hell and never saw an official release. What is this game? Who made it? What is happening with it? Why is this important to us in this day and age? Well, it is still a fantastic fighting game, and we just got access to a previously thought lost beta. So let's talk a little bit about Monster, all right? So 8105 Graphics is actually led by, it's a one-man development team from everything I can find out, led by Sho Kawakami. Sho Kawakami is also known as Shock or Natalie Sin in various internet circles. You know, I gotta be honest, I'm a little unsure of the pedigree of this developer. I am unsure where they come from. I do know that they definitely have a history as a kimono artist or a furry artist, right? That is, I from everything I can tell, that they have a pedigree as an artist working in the kimono scene. That much I think we know is true. Now, I've done some research and I found a website called World 1-1, and they claim that Shock is actually a former Capcom artist who worked on the Vampire Savior series. This is one of those things that, like, I have not been able to corroborate this at all. I have, right? That was the rumor at the moment, according to Hyama, right? But I have not been able to corroborate this. I've looked through a ton of the Capcom Vampire Savior Darkstalkers credits. Some of the adjacent games that I know some team members crossed over on, I've taken a look at their animation teams to see if I can find any of these names. Either, Sho Kawakami, Shock, or Natalie Sin. Nothing. And if somebody has confined the references of these names anywhere in any Capcom game, that would go a long way to corroborating this. As far as I can see, only World 1-1 has actually made this claim that they are a former Capcom artist. Now, given how crediting in arcade games actually worked in that era, right, in the 90s, even into the 2000s, crediting in fighting games, especially arcade circles and Japanese devs, it was very, very bad. You did not get proper credit. You had to use aliases. Aliases could change for people over time, so tracking down who did what and who was actually responsible for that can be quite difficult in a lot of situations. So that's not to say that Shock wasn't a Capcom artist working on the Vampire Savior series in some capacity, but I have not been able to actually corroborate that. I don't know if, you've heard this too, Roderick. You don't know if it's true, but the wolf has John Talbane's taunt, right? And there are, if you look at the game, all right, there are some fair similarities between some of the characters. There's a wolf character who actually has Talbane's multi-dash 8-way super. There is a character called Shelly who is remarkably similar in some design aspects to, Morgan or Lilith, right? Some of the visual designs. But they've got the Morgan Air Dash. There's a lot of similarities there, right? So the crossover between some of the influences in Monster are definitely apparent when you look back at Darkstalkers. Now, is that because they worked on it? Is that because they were inspired by it? I'm not entirely sure. What we do know is that 8105 Graphics is a solo dev team. So Shock is the solo dev, plus working with VO artists, at least for the first version of the game. And work started on the first version of Monster in 2003. And so they started working on it. They did all the animations, the programming. I believe they built the engine from scratch. I don't know what kind of tools they used to do it or what it's built in, but it seems to be a bespoke engine. They spent 2 years working on this before coming out with a trial version in 2005. That was actually a paid trial version. So in the intervening years, 2003 to 2005, working on the game, doing some promotion, getting a website up, and then the paid trial version came out in 2005. This was met with, some good reception. A little scene developed. They started working on the game, continuing to do updates. And finally, in 2006, they released version 1.11b came out, which is the last update for the original version of Monster that we know of. It was at this point that it was the full version of the game, and you could purchase it from Shock's website, right? So you can go to the 8105 graphics website and pick it up. I mean, that's kind of pretty standard. Like, it's interesting, the pedigree, if that's true, like that is a super interesting thing, that, you know, former Capcom developer moves on to do independent stuff because they're not happy with the state of fighting games. There's an interview with Shock, actually, from 2007, and they talk about the disappointment they had with the direction that fighting games were going in and wanted to try something different. And there are a couple really interesting systems in Monster that kind of, like, I don't know, that backs up their claims there, right? Horseplay saying that former Capcom devs supposedly made Vanguard Princess, so it's not unheard of that would happen. And in that 2007 interview, actually, what Shock talks about is they start saying that they actually, if they want to continue working on this series in any fashion, that they'll have to start delegating to an engineer to continue development. They say that they're actually really bad with working with people and managing people, so that's partly why it was a solo development, but looking at expansions, looking at where that's going to go from there, I mean, they said they really have to bring somebody on board. Somewhere in and around here, post-2007, Shock seems to hook up with FGC member Aya Immortal. Now, this is a name that, and hopefully maybe Hayama, maybe Roderick, if you have any information on where Aya Immortal came from. Oh yeah, Aya Immortal, you're right, that is the final boss character of Hino Kakara. I don't know what their history comes from, but in some fashion, they get hooked up. Yama, they were in constant contact with Aya Immortal between 2007 and 2009. And, okay, this makes a lot of sense, because like I said, at this point, Shock hooks up with Aya Immortal, and they are obviously the one that they decided to delegate some of these responsibilities to. Aya was working as a battle engineer and helping with the updates on this game, but wasn't a programmer themselves, as far as I'm aware. They weren't an animator either, so, like, in terms of what they're able to do, and we'll see why this is important in a moment, it was limited to a lot of the combat balance aspects of it. Now, in 2008, it is announced that an arcade version of Monster is in the works. This would be Ancient Cline. So the update, the game that we're going to be playing in a little bit, Monster Ancient Cline. This is the 2008 arcade version. Now, it was destined for the X board, made by Examu, and they are a studio and publisher who released both Arcana Heart 2 and 3 on the EX board arcade platform, as well as a Demon Bride game. Some history there. Quick side note, I actually find it really interesting that Examu has Arcana Heart 2 and 3, and they're the folks working with kind of indie doujin devs in this like late 2000s, 2008 to 2012 era. Right? And then these days, we have Exa Arcadia working on the Exa board, working with, lo and behold, Arcana Heart, the devs for Arcana Heart, and they have a version of Arcana Heart on there. They're working with Light Green 8 for Dynamite Bomb, and Project Atsuki for Axel City, and getting those games and those doujin devs into an arcade platform. Very, very interesting, like, similarity and parallel there between what was going on with the arcade publishing scene at that time and what's happening now, actually. But that's a little bit of a side note. We have Monster Ancient Cline destined for the EX board. It started getting worked on. They started doing some updates. This version had several location tests in Japan, but the development of the game kind of fell by the wayside after, and this is according to Aya, after Shock was offered a position at Arc System Works, developers of BlazBlue and Guilty Gear. Right? Apparently this was a very generous offer, and they decided to accept it. And I mean, what happens when you're working on your own fighting game, and then you get hired by one of the larger fighting game developers? What do? Well, you'll probably stop working on your game. This version was kind of defunct, right? They had some tests, some location tests, like I said. They were working on the game. They had a couple different versions. Actually, here we can go through here. Talking about Monster, we have this is the original version, one of the early original versions of Monster. You can see the plain gray UIs, and as the game went through development, it changed some, right? Eventually, the official release, the 1.1b release of Monster, looks like this, right? Slightly different UI, bit of updates here and there, and then we get into the EX board version. Now, this is one of the earliest screens of the EX board version that I could actually find. And you can see brand new UI, much sleeker looking, actually, very, like, much better cohesive design, if you ask me. So if we look back here, right? This is, yeah, Celian cats, and then Celian, Mayan cats, apologies, right? So, like, you can see the difference here, right? In the intervening years between 2006 and 2009, or 8, which is when I believe these versions were coming out, you can see the big improvement, right? And here again, Maya versus cats. It does look very nice, right? But Hayama saying Examu was actually a pretty shitty company as well, all things told, so he basically escaped that situation. Interesting. Oh, Examu also made Aquapaza, Nitropolis Blaster, Million Arthur Arcana Blood. See, like I said, those were the folks working in the kind of like indie space and approaching Japanese devs at the time. And today we have XR Arcadia doing the same, though less aggressively, I would say. So this is what Monster is looking like at this point in 2009. At this point, Shock stopped working on the game, but did hand over the reins and the rights to the game to Aya Immortal. Now, this is where we get into what will become the version that we're going to play today. The EX board actually ends up being discontinued in 2013. And by that point, by about 2010 to 2012, Aya has been working on a version that he says will become the Steam version of the game. And this Steam version of the game would be free to play, and it would include rollback netcode. So that's kind of where they're at this point, right? They have shifted from it's not going to be an arcade release. The original one was a PC release. Okay, we can do that. Where are PC games at in 2010? Well, they're all going to Steam. So that's it. Rollback netcode in 2012. That was the claim. Now, I have some doubts as to how realistic this was from the get-go. Aya, to his own admission, was not the programmer of the game, right? So they might have enough knowledge, or they might have enough programming skills to be able to assess whether or not the version, the Examu version that they were working from, was able to be implement a rollback netcode solution for it, right? Perhaps they were, but I don't think they necessarily have the skills to do it themselves. So in this time period here, the 2012 to 2015, Aya was looking for a partner to work with in order to continue development of the game. Rollback was way before that. It's true, Hayama, right? But it is interesting that it was once again an indie developer, cognizant of the state of fighting games and what was going on with things like Fightcade and how, and like seeing the importance of rollback netcode at that point in time, and willing to declare that it was something that was going to be included in the free to play version of the game. This game was also, they also had plans to have DLC for the game down the line, which would also be free. But in order to do this, you have to hook up with more artists, because they're not the artist of the game. They'd have to hook up with programmers to make sure that the updates can happen, more than just working on modifying the battle balance, which is what Aya was primarily doing. They did demo some of this work. Around 2012, there were versions of Ancient Cline that were being demoed at EVO, apparently. Now, this is where we've gotten some of the original footage of Ancient Cline that you can find. You can actually find a bunch of it out on YouTube. Worth noting that around the time Street Fighter 4 came out, around 2009, 2010, there was a very solid community of Monster players on the Shoryuken.com forums. The SRK forums were a pretty solid place for some of these smaller communities, and Monster did develop a following there, right? And so Aya was out on the SRK forums searching for beta players. They demoed it at EVO. There are some location tests out there. And so it's at this point that we move from the old EXA version, and there's actually a live stream. There's a Justin TV stream of Aya going over some of this information. And in it, they're showing off a version of the game that still has the arcade credit count at the top of the screen. As you can see in this screenshot here, it's actually gone. This is from a later version of Ancient Cline that was obviously being built as the PC Steam version. We have these location tests, we have these videos come out, this is why we've even known about this game for it, because I mean, he was very active on SRK forums, which were very active as well. There was a Monster community already, there was interest in this, people were playing some of it. After 2015, I believe there's a post on the Monster Ancient Cline Facebook page from 2015, and it's Aya saying, hey man, it's gonna take a lot for me to be able to actually do this. I think at some point they realized that they overpromised and were not able to deliver on those things without a pretty significant amount of help. And they did an appeal to the community to see what the community support was like, to see if there was anyone there who was able to help out. And that if they reached some kind of threshold of likes and reposts on Facebook, that they would be continuing development. And then ghosts, right? It goes quiet. Let me take us back. Let me take us back to the beginning. Monster. by 8105 graphics. Sho Kawakami, also known as Shock, who may or may not be a former Capcom artist working on the Vampire Savior series, leaves Capcom to work on their own game. They are a kimono artist, which is a furry artist in the Japanese scene, and they start building this game, Monster. It looks like this in the early days. It's got some interesting systems, like this power break system, which Shock uses as an example of, like, this is what I want to do with fighting games that are different and interesting, and fighting games have become boring, which is why I'm making Monster. Development on the game starts in 2003, and they released a trial version in 2005 that you could purchase and invest in. They work on the game throughout 2003 to 2006, at which point the final version of the original Monster, 1.11b, gets released, and you are able to purchase it. Later on, 2007, 2008, Shock talks about expanding the operation and bringing on other people to work with, even though they're not fantastic at working with other people, and so they need to delegate some responsibilities to continue work on it. This leads to a 2008 arcade version that was destined for Examu's EX board, famous for hosting Arcana Heart 2 and 3 and Demon Bride. And then that unfortunately fell to the wayside after Shock was offered a position at Arxis in order to work on one of their games, some game. Who knows? Arxis works on a lot of stuff, famously BlazBlue, Guilty Gear. They did accept that, and then the EX board version of Monster Ancient Cline was discontinued around 2013. So Shock stops working on the game, hands over the reins to Aya Immortal, who's an FGC member who's been working in the scene, and they take over the reins to make a Steam version of the game that was going to be free to play and have rollback netcode. We got a bunch of videos from different location tests and some events hosted at EVO 2012, up through 2012. And then a couple months ago, Plasma Sword, the brilliant figure in the niche fighting scene, Plasma Sword, shoutouts, brought it to my attention that a version of Ancient Cline has been circulating in the Chinese corners of the internet. And friends, this is the thing. This game wasn't lost. Right? I'd say this this thought to be lost beta, right? It was only thought to be lost by English-speaking, English-language folks. People had access to it, right? And this game was circulating the Chinese interwebs, and someone took note of this and was like, holy fuck, this isn't just Monster, this is actually the PC version of Ancient Cline, which, as far as I can tell, the version that we're going to be playing looks newer than any other video I can find of Ancient Cline. We didn't lose this, man. It was there. And so someone found the corners of the internet that were still talking about it, and then dumped it on the Internet Archive. Lo and behold, we have a version of Monster Ancient Cline that we're able to play that we didn't think was going to be able to happen. Hidden in plain sight. This happens a surprising amount, like, legitimately. This happens a lot. It was a very similar story with the Laptop Arcade 7, if y'all remember that from a couple years ago, right? It was this little, like, tabletop arcade setup that had a couple fighting games that seemed to be like bespoke fighting games created for this system. The Laptop Arcade 7 was sitting there. It was there, right? People were seeing like, oh, where did this footage come? Where are these screenshots coming from? It was on Amazon. You could purchase it. It was on Alibaba. You can purchase it. The developers had a website there, and they listed the games that they worked on. It was right there. We just didn't look there because it wasn't English language. And so it's a big problem, right? And so when we talk about a bit of the fighting game archaeology that Guardian was talking about at the beginning of the stream, right? If we're going to be doing that, we need to be able to pay attention to different language sources, right? Now, this is something that I'm able to speak French. I'm able to read French. I really need to be digging into, like, the French arcade history and to see what's there. There's a lot of crossover between France and Japan. There's a lot of cultural exchange that happens there. Anime crossover happens a lot. Manga crossover used to happen a lot. Video games crossovers happen a lot. So when those, like, cultural divides get bridged by certain communities, if you have access to them, if you're able to speak Portuguese or Spanish or Dutch or whatever the case may be, in my case French, take a look into these places, right? And maybe you will find that, lo and behold, there's this previously thought lost version of a game that, oh yeah, here's the PSX beta. It's been sitting around here for 10 years, right? Shoutouts to Plasma Sword for bringing this to our attention. Shoutouts to this unknown FGC member. I'm not sure who it was. I actually haven't been able to find their name. I must rectify that, actually. That's kind of where we're at. This is what brought us to the tale of Monster that brings us to today, when we're going to be able to actually play this game. Now, before we do that, I'm gonna hop into the voice chat over in my Discord, and I'm gonna bring on Hayama, and I want them to talk a little bit about their experience being a beta tester for Monster. But they had some attention, like had some talk with Ayama immortal throughout this time, so maybe we can get a little bit more insight into what's going on.